Good afternoon, friends and relatives. Welcome to the Minnesota Historical Society and to the fourth event in the Artists in the Gallery series. To start us off, I would like to say that my colleagues and I here at MNHS acknowledge that Minnesota is Dakota and Ojibwe homeland. Dakota creation stories are centered in Minnesota, and this regional territory is also an important place in traditional Ojibwe history, as well as those of other tribal nations. Today, Minnesota is both an ancestral and contemporary home to many Native people, including 11 Dakota and Ojibwe tribal nations. The idea of home and homelands plays a central role in our recently developed exhibit, Our Home Native Minnesota, and I'd like to welcome you to the fourth in a series of artist and gallery programs. The program will be archived and available as a recording on Facebook and YouTube. The Artists in the Gallery series highlights many of the artists featured in the Our Home Native Minnesota exhibit. Support for this program is provided by the Rosemary and David Good Family Foundation. We invite you to fill out a short survey following today's program to let us know what you think. As everyone can probably guess, I am not Ben Gessner. My colleague and dear friend, Ben Gessner, who serves as curator of the Native American collections here at MNHS, was unable to be here today, but he's here with us in spirit. So I am here in his place for this event. Mitakepi, my name is Kate Bean. I am a citizen of the Flanders Santee Sioux Oyate, and I am Director of Native American Initiatives here at the Minnesota Historical Society. I was also one of the co-developers of the Our Home exhibit, which opened a year ago this week. Time flies. And so originally we had hoped and planned to hold these programs in the Our Home exhibit space with all of you. But today it's just me in the gallery, but our hope is to help connect all of you at home with this gallery and with the beautiful artworks and stories that we have shared within this space. In the work that we do, we also must acknowledge that museums in many ways have played a role in cultural interruption for Native people, and it is the responsibility of all of us who are museum professionals today to acknowledge and work towards repairing the damages that stem from that history and to be held accountable for it today. As Native professionals, we hold a unique place within institutions such as this one, and sometimes we get to come together and focus on some really fantastic topics with amazing people. And I'm happy to be here today with two of my favorite artists and relatives. In addition to their artistic brilliance, this hardworking mother-daughter duo are educators and leaders who inspire me every day. Dr. Gwen Westerman is a former artist in residence here at MNHS, and she is here along with her apprentice and daughter, Erin Griffin. They will be speaking about their work as textile artists and the contributions they make within their own communities as writers, educators, language learners and teachers, and as community program developers. So please leave questions in the chat. Staff are moderating that space and we'll bring them up during the Q&A towards the end of the program. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to Tuwing Gwen and Icheponshi Erin to introduce yourselves.
Hamitakiapi, Dad Yahipi Kinwashtek, He Ma Iokpi, Gwen Westerman Makiapi, Sisituan Wapetuan Oyate Hemataha, Trojan Ka MNHS Ija Pidamaya Yapi. Hello, everyone. I'm glad that you're all here with us today to talk about what it means to create ribbon work, quilts, and other forms of art, recognizing the roots in our traditional Dakota culture.
Hamitakiapi, Ishnana Najimi Demie, Erin Griffin, and Makiapia. Sisi Tuan Wakpe Tuan Hamataha, Westerman Tiwahe Ki Hamataha. Hello, my relatives. I'm Erin Griffin. I'm known as Stands Alone Woman, and I'm happy to be here today with everybody to discuss our art and our passions.
You wish steak day. So, Tui, maybe you could first talk about your work and some of the textile pieces that you've done in the past here at the Minnesota Historical Society.
I'm a poet and a scholar and an artist, and I can't imagine doing just one of those things because they're very much interconnected for me. And quilts have been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. And I grew up in a place, in a home, in a series of grandmothers and aunties and cousins' homes where quilts were meant to be used and weren't looked at as an art form. I started sewing when I was about 11, and because my grandmother made quilts by hand, I saved my scraps of fabric for her from the projects that I made, the skirts and blouses and dresses, and these quilts tell stories. Like the quilt that's behind me. This is Erin's baby quilt that my grandmother made for her. And it has pieces of fabric from the clothes I made in junior high and high school. So that's part of the story for that one. I didn't start quilting until 2000. And I was inspired by some of the work I saw at the Northern Plains Indian Art Market, and didn't consider myself an artist, but decided to jump in and participate that way. So these are some of the textile pieces that I've made that are in the collections at MNHS in the background here, and variations on 8-pointed star quilts, but then I also do landscape shapes and dye fabric when I can't find what I need. So there's a quick introduction.
Yeah, Maya. Erin, what type of work did you experience? Did you work with before your residency here?
Before my residency, I actually started beading when I was 12. I started making those dangly earrings that were popular in the 90s. And I've been beading ever since. When I was about 20, I think I was about 20 and I started doing quill work. I looked for lots of different resources on how to do that. And that's mainly what I did until the apprenticeship with my mom, learning how to do ribbon work. And it was a nice thing, a nice artwork to take on. It complements what I've always done with beadwork and quill work.
Some time. I know I've spent some time beading with you a bit. You've tried to help teach me to bead. I'm not the best, but I try. I make an effort. Thanks to you, I'm always inspired. But I'm wearing some beautiful quill earrings that you made, that my chekpa, that my sister gifted to me, which are some of my favorites. So just an example of some of the beautiful quill work that you do. And when you think about the work that you do, what made you interested in ribbon work applique in particular?
I think what got us started is when the La Framboise blanket was on Antiques Roadshow. And then it made its rounds in Minnesota, and we saw it at the Brown County Historical Society, and saw the intricate ribbon work that was on there in addition to beadwork. And then listening to people talk about it who didn't know anything about sewing or about beading, and had these different theories about how many hours and how many women it would take to complete a work like that. I think that was the starting point for me. It was like, I see how that works, and I'm going to learn how to do this, because here's an example from my family. I'm not directly descended from Jane Dixon, but she was married to my great grandfather, Joseph Laframboise, who was Odawa and French. But because it's got that Laframboise name, I think it it was a real inspiration to me that this is something that was seen by members of my extended family a long time ago.
What can you tell me about the history of ribbon work and the history of star quilts in general? Both of those different mediums.
Ribbon work, as a decorative embellishment, is a product of trade. And we've got documentation from early expeditions to Minnesota in the 1820s, where the scribes were documenting the clothing of Dakota people, including Dakota women, and the ribbon work that was incorporated into their blankets and their skirts. And Samuel and Gideon Pond also documented it in 1834 and talked about how Dakota women would have a series of silk ribbons attached to their skirts, more than a foot wide. So you can imagine how intricate and colorful that must have been. So that's part of the ribbon work aspect of it. We're always decorating. We're always decorating everything, and I think that's a tradition that goes back so many generations. We don't have an origin story for it. Star quilts out of fabric are similar. Women would make pieced blankets out of rabbit fur and hide. Then when wool became available through trade, they used the woolen blankets. And when the missionaries came with sewing machines and cotton fabric, calico fabric, they started a quilting tradition among Native women. And I've heard a story, I'm going to have to find out if it's true or not, that when the missionaries went to Hawaii and showed the Hawaiian women there how to cut pieces of fabric and then sew it all back together, they were puzzled why you do that. And that's how their tradition of whole cloth quilting came about, because it made no sense to them to cut up fabric and then sew it back together. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to us either. So that 8-pointed star comes from that time period where sewing machines were introduced, and hand sewing and hand quilting was still something that was quite widespread among our communities.
What do you think is distinctly different about Dakota ribbon work in particular?
There's an incorporation of not only geometric designs, but also floral designs and birds incorporated into the ribbons as they're stitched to the base. It's very similar to what the Osage women in Oklahoma do, and the Odawa women in Nebraska. So it's a tradition that's been carried on across multiple tribal groups.
I'm going to step over here and pick up one of these pieces to help show what the ribbon work looks like. I'm going to pick up a piece that's created by you, Erin, if you want to speak to this piece at all.
I think something else to consider with the history of ribbon work and in general, the things that women made over time, Dakota women over time, and you can see this in the collections at museums, the amount of detail and care that went into pieces. And this one I made, I believe, at the end of the residency. And I was trying to reflect water in that, which you can probably tell with the blues. Yes, it's beautiful. But the thing that I find inspiring is the amount of detail and intricacy in older pieces. The further back in time you go, the more detail that you see, and you can tell that in beadwork. You can see it in quillwork, and you can see it in ribbon work. The amount of care that women took to make these pieces was incredible, and you can see that through the size of things that are made, the difficulty in which they were made. So those moccasins have very detailed ribbon work on them, and that would have taken time. And much like the La Framboise blanket too, like my mom mentioned that, you know, there was even floral work and animals designed into ribbon work, and that's not an easy thing to do. But what these things were made for, they weren't just made for show, they were made to honor relatives. And you see that love and that care for the relatives in the way that those things are made, and beauty comes across in that, because they were honoring their children and their sisters and brothers and parents with those things.
And so I just showed you that that beautiful doll as well. And so, you know, I'm thinking about how our communities and our families use these pieces and interacted with these pieces. You know, what is some of that cultural significance for us?
I think it reinforces how much we focused on what was beautiful around us. There are traditional flowers and plants that are incorporated into beadwork, some into ribbon work and quill work, and we're always observing what's around us. And this is one way to record what we see around us and what we saw as beautiful and meaningful.
Of, you know, that these artworks, I love that description that these artworks are, you know, were a part of our everyday lives. You know, they were a part of our children's toys. They were a part of what we wore. They were a part of things that we used every day and honored every day. Would you describe this as an endangered art form in any way?
I think any type of handwork is endangered, because you can't see how small the stitches are in the ribbon work, or see the process of cleaning quills and flattening and dyeing quills before they're used. I don't bead. I've been banned from beading because I'm not very good.
So I'm not alone.
And Erin basically has taken all my beads away from me. So, but I think anything that requires intricate stitching is endangered. We're a fast food culture. We want everything and we want it right now. And I think that impacts the kind of decorative embellishment or handwork, any type of handwork. We as a culture, a broader culture, don't really value that in a way that reflects the amount of time and effort and love that goes into a hand-stitched piece.
I'll add to that too. In addition to the technique of making these things, also the knowledge that goes behind them as well. So, you know, like my mom's saying, we're a fast food culture. We want everything right away. But a lot of this takes years of learning. One of the things that some of my students in the past have asked me is where I get my designs. And I think sometimes there's these assumptions that things are copied, and I know that happens a lot across the country. You know, people see things that they like and they copy them. But one of the things that I always taught my students whenever I would teach beadwork or quillwork is that you don't copy things, and if you're going to use somebody else's design, you need to have their permission to do that. But the way that I'm able to come up with designs is through knowledge and interaction with my environment, knowledge of myself too. But I would say over the last maybe 10 years, I've really been trying to learn as much as I can about plant knowledge, and not just learning that, but experiencing it as well. I have 3 gardens, and then I also do a lot of harvesting throughout the summer and the fall, and all of the processes that go with that. It's a lot of hard work, and it takes a long time to learn these things, but that's what comes through in the work that we do too, is that knowledge and those experiences, those relationships, whether it's with people, animals, our environment, the stars. There's a lot of knowledge that goes into that.
So there's a lot of knowledge and there's a lot of connection and reconnection, right? Your sound was a little bit off, but we heard most of what you said, Iche Panshi, and I think everything you said was spot on. When I think about these pieces, when I think about these types of work, I also think about the love that goes into them. And you know, you Iche Panshi, Erin, you're the one who made baby moccasins for my babies, and when I was living far away from home, receiving those moccasins for my daughters, and I myself, you know, maybe didn't have baby moccasins when I was a baby, and it skipped a generation of my family. You helped bring that back for us, and that reconnection, and helping us to understand who we are and to remember each other as relatives is just so incredibly important. When people talk about textile arts as so-called women's work, what do you think of this term, and has there been a shift in how we may think differently about it today?
I thought that was an interesting question, because in contemporary quilting, in the contemporary quilting world, some of the most popular and most honored quilt designers and quilters are men. And it's the same in beading. There are men who do amazing beadwork, and I think that's a label that's put on by outsiders, or almost as a way of devaluing it. Oh, that's just women's work, and not acknowledging the role of women as equals in our culture. That you can't do everything unless we all are working together. So I always bristle a little bit when I hear that, women's work.
I appreciate that that explanation, and I think it's really, I agree, it's really interesting to think about, and how things change over time, and roles for all of us, no matter what gender or what spectrum. Do you consider yourselves traditional artists, or what does that term mean to you? And I just want to quickly remind folks who are watching to please drop in your questions. We will have a Q&A section at the end of this program. But traditional artists, what does that mean to you? Jay Panshi.
Traditional artists. I think of myself as somebody who makes things, and that's how I express myself. I guess I'm an artist. I'm an educator. I'm even an anthropologist. But at the bottom of all of that, at the foundation of all of that, I make things that reflect me and that reflect where I've come from, who I've come from, and the knowledge that I've been blessed with, and the skill that I've been blessed with. And I think traditional, the concept of traditional, if you think about all the different eras of time that have existed, there's not one tradition. There are things over time that have become something that a lot of people practice, and some of my art reflects certain time periods, so that might be considered traditional, but I think there's more to it. As Dakota people and as Dakota women, we and our ancestors, those that have come before us, have changed and adapted over time, and our artwork reflects that. And I think that what I try most to reflect is the detail that I've seen in the work, in museum collections, the time and consideration that's put into that, and the knowledge that's put into that, and I think that could be considered traditional. Attention to detail, attention to others, and knowledge of your surroundings. That's traditional to me. And things change over time. We're talking about ribbon work. That was something that was introduced over time. But I really like to combine arts, to combine techniques, and find a way to help that fit into our contemporary reality as well, because we are contemporary people, and we reflect what's come before us. We reflect our current realities, and we're also thinking about the future, and how do we bring those things together. So traditional, I guess that's how I think of it.
Peter, I think that it's so interesting that you talk about the traditional being the contemporary, right? And I'm wondering how these thoughts and how this work that you do within your art form also transforms to other kinds of work that you do, such as language revitalization. Can you speak about some of that?
With language revitalization, I think the important thing to remember is that all of these things go together. Everything goes together. And from the time that I was little, I heard that language and culture go hand in hand, but I never truly understood that. I would repeat that because I knew it was important, but I don't think I truly understood it until within the last 10 years, I've come to realize what that truly means. And we get in a bad habit of operating and creating things in silos. We think that, oh, well, that's language, that goes over here, and that's art, so that goes over here. And science and education. We make all these little boxes and put things into them, but they need to go together. And to be able to convey our meaning, our knowledge, our understanding through Dakota and through Dakota thought is something that's developed in relationship to each other. Because it is language, we have to talk to each other. But it's also developed in relationship to environment, and in relationship to how we carry ourselves and create. And that can be in a lot of different ways. For me, it happens to be art. I create through art. And when you combine these things, when you put these things together, it makes them that much more powerful, and it gives them that much more meaning. And the designs that you're able to create, the complexity that exists within the art that you make changes and reflects that knowledge. And I hope I'm explaining it as best I can, but that's what I've experienced. These things have to go together, and it's not automatic. Sometimes it's really hard to think outside of the box and to figure out how to put things back together again. But that's vitally important.
Yeah, Maya. There was an echo there. Sorry. Tuween, did you have a comment to add to that?
Our language is a living thing, and the more we use it, the more we speak to each other in the language, the way we incorporate the language into our daily tasks is what helps strengthen us. It's kind of hard to explain, but when I speak English, my voice comes from here. This is where I feel English. But when I speak Dakota, it comes from farther down in my chest. I have no way to explain it, but that's just the physical connection to it. And being aware of how our language can shape our view is another part of that effort to come back to the language. The language didn't go anywhere. We're the ones that went away. So it's, again, like we've been talking about this afternoon, all of these things are interconnected and strengthen each other.
Let's talk about the residency a bit. So when were you artist in residence, and what was that experience like?
I think 2014. It seems like ages ago now, but it was an exceptional opportunity to take a look at Dakota ribbon work in institutions and collections across the country. The little doll that you held up was the one that we always kind of gush over, because her ribbon work is so intricate, and she has hair and beaded moccasins and leggings, and just to hold that and to see and to know that someone made that with love, you just want to soak it in. But I think what was especially important was to be able to see these ribbon work pieces in other places. I had the opportunity to go to the collections at the National Museum of the American Indian. And believe it or not, the Natural History Museum in New York City held Dakota ribbon work. And so to touch something that someone else had made 100 years ago, 150 years ago, was that physical connection, I think, that was important to me. And to see their techniques and to see the colors that they used. It's not the same as looking at an image in a book or a slide. And that was especially productive and meaningful for me. And then to have 3 apprentices, Erin and Randy Lynn Boucher and Elise Boxer, who were all in various stages of quilting and beadwork, and to introduce this ribbon work to them as one of our cultural handicrafts was probably the best part of all of that.
So just a reminder to those who are watching the program, please make sure to drop your questions or comments in the comment box so that we can address those towards the end of the program. So talking about the residency, you mentioned you were able to travel, that you went to NMAI, and were there other places that you were able to go or other artists that you were able to engage with during your residency?
We also went to the Science Museum and looked at some of the pieces that came through from the Bishop Whipple collection. And so the curators in these places, I think, were really interesting to talk to and to be able to describe to them what this ribbon work was and how it was made and who made it in some cases for the pieces that came from Siston in the early 1900s, to recognize family names and community names. Gave them, I think, a human being to attach it to, not just an accession record. And they were really helpful.
How do you feel the collections that you looked at and the museums that you went to, the pieces that you interacted with, how do you feel that influenced your work? This is a question for each of you.
For me, specifically with the ribbon work, when we were able to go to the Minneapolis Institute of Art and look at the Le Framboise blanket up close, being able to see those small details of how they did their stitches, what the thread looked like, what the back looked like, what the undersides of ribbons looked like, is really, really important. And, one thing I had heard quite a while ago was a criticism of all the bright colors that people are using in their beadwork and ribbon work these days. And somebody said, well, that's not something we did. We didn't wear bright colors. And being able to go into the museums and see where the ribbons hadn't faded and see how bright those colors were was incredible knowledge to gain and to be able to share with others. But then also, I had a chance, I did a fellowship with the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, and I got to see a quilled cradle board there, and the techniques on that cradle board, you can't see them in the pictures. And I saw Quillwork techniques on that cradle board that I had never seen before. And I never would have noticed if I had only been looking in books or pictures online. And then to be able to connect with those pieces, sometimes it can be really emotional. You know, even seeing my own bags in the collections there, I like to visit them because I have a connection to them. So it's really, really important to be able to have that opportunity to be able to go and see and touch these things, and to connect with how they were made. Thank you. But really, you know, I can't overemphasize the techniques and the quality of materials that were used in the pieces that are in the collections. The quality is really incredible, and I find that inspiring. You know, I try to put as much detail as possible into the work that I do because of that. And I think so, like on that bag that's in the image, I use size 13 beads on that, and a majority of the beadwork that I do is with size 13s. Because because of what I've seen in the museums, I like to be able to reflect that kind of detail. And I pulled this down in case people thought that was perhaps a picture or something. This is actually beaded. And then some of the ribbon work that I have as well. I actually started working on this one after we had seen the La Framboise blanket, because I was inspired with the types of designs that were on that blanket. And so this was the first time that I tried to do these really long points, and they're really, really hard. It's really hard to be able to do that. But that's how I'm inspired by seeing those things.
Well, I'm happy that we're able to reconnect you with some of your pieces here today. I know we have the pieces that I've shown and the quilts behind me by Tui. I know for Our Home Gallery, the star quilt behind us is the piece that you see when you come into the gallery. We were asked to showcase something that we felt was really powerful and something that was striking and impactful. And this was a piece that we chose to welcome people into the gallery. Tuween, do you want to say anything else about this piece?
People ask me how long it took me to make that quilt, and they don't like my answer because it was made over a series of different quilts through 8 years. And every time I made a quilt for someone in my family, whether it was for a celebration or for their passing, I made an extra large diamond. And then when I had about 12 of them, I decided to put them together there. And so that particular quilt represents a lot of special people in our family. And because we're star people, not only is that the star, the 8-pointed star, but I included constellations that are in the sky, the northern sky from here in Minnesota, between January 14th and March 21st, which are Erin and my son Travis's birthdays. And I used Swarovski crystals. And it's always great to be in a place where your quilt is hanging up and listen to people talk and hear, oh, Swarovski crystals. Those aren't traditional. And in my little voice in my head, I said, they are now. But yeah, just it's an incredible honor to have that particular piece there, and to be part of the permanent collections at the Minnesota Historical Society. So thank you for selecting that.
We have another piece here, the Cascades Pardon. Is there anything that you want to mention about that piece?
Oh, that is an important piece to me. Cascades Pardon, because I was inspired by Mexican retablas of the saints, and thought about what he might have said, because he was not among the 38 on the list of the 38. So he was not supposed to be executed that day, and he was. And so this was part of the 1862 show, and above his head and below his feet are little inscriptions that say, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." And I expected a lot of pushback on that, but I think it struck a lot of people and gave them another view in to those events.
Very timely events to be speaking about this month, and right at this time period as well. Mm-hmm. So I've come to find out that we have many questions coming in, and so maybe we'll move through and respond to a couple of questions that came in from our viewers. Ruben Latz asks, as these wonders are shared more and more widely beyond tribal nations, to what extent are you concerned about cultural appropriation of Native knowledge and skills?
I don't know that we'll ever be able to stop it. And that's where we have to be, we as a community, we as admirers of work by Indigenous people, have to be on guard and willing to stand up and say, this is a ripoff of someone else's piece. You're not acknowledging the original piece that you were inspired by. And to call out those instances that we see. There was something on Facebook not very long ago of there was a quilt, and no, it was some kind of like a cover up shawl, and it had printed images on them, and I recognized those images, but they had been appropriated by a company that was printing them on this fabric and selling these shawls. And so there's always going to be appropriation, there's always going to be misuse, but when we see it, we have to be willing to call it out.
And we could post up another question from someone coming through. Megan Evans asks, did you collaborate with other Native American artists and artists during your residencies? If so, how did the collaboration influence your research and work?
Did we lose Erin? Okay. All right. So I'll go ahead. Okay. I'll start in, and she can add too. Pat Cruz, who is the most amazing birch bark worker that I know, was also an artist in residence during my time there, and we struck up a lot of conversations about how similar our forms were, quilting and the amazing birch bark pieces that he creates. So I wish there had been more opportunities for us to talk with each other and to go through the collections together and share other ideas, or maybe even collaborate on a project. So that would be my response.
I absolutely love that idea. I think moving forward, we should definitely think about that. And I'm happy to see Erin Ichepanshi has found her way back in the interwebs. She found her way back to us. I know connections can be difficult. But let's move on to the next question. Jenny Kryptonite asks, is there a specific type or weight of ribbon that you like to work with? Have you dyed any of your own to get the preferred color for your project?
We use a number of different kinds of ribbon. There are some polyester ribbons that work well for larger projects. Silk ribbon is really the easiest and the most difficult at the same time to use. It's easy to stitch, but it takes more dexterity to keep the ribbon in place. But silk ribbon is hard to find. So what do you want to add, Erin?
I'd say stay away from the cheap stuff at Walmart. Don't use that. Yeah. And sometimes when I'm teaching ribbon work, I'll show people with cotton first, because cotton is really easy to use. Whereas, taffeta and satin kinds of ribbon like to fray. So like the white and the blue on the ends here are fraying. And that can be really difficult to work with when you're doing the points. So sometimes if you're just starting out, sometimes it's easier to use cotton. So the first piece that I showed, this is actually cotton. And it's just a lot easier to use. And then too, you can, if you're making something that you're going to wash, you can wash cotton.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Next question, Steph McCabe asks, 100 years from now, how will people recognize Dakota designs of today? What will be the hallmarks? Still florals and birds? Or, as Erin referenced, designs inspired from the artist's personal lives?
Well, Steph, I intend to still be alive 100 years from now.
We hope so.
Just kidding. I think it has to do with continuing to teach this handiwork, to teach this art form. And it may go through a dip in interest, and then people will come back to the collections and say, oh, look, this was made in 2020, and what can we learn from it, and how can we be influenced by these designs? It's a generation to generation kind of handiwork that is perpetuated in that way.
I think too that society changes, so how that looks, how our art forms look, how people engage with them will change. And over this last year, we've seen changes in society that we never would have imagined would have happened. And now people are making and wearing masks, and we're seeing the incorporation of art, more traditional techniques into that. So these things will change, but I think too, because of our relationship with land as Dakota people, there are some aspects that will always carry through, I hope.
Our good friend Jenny Kryptonite asks, are there any resources of ribbon work classes that the public can access?
I don't know.
I've actually done some tutorials on my Facebook page, and I was planning on putting some on YouTube. I've got my beadwork on YouTube right now, but if I find time in between school and work, I'll probably put something up on there. But I don't know of any either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. And, you know, I was just talking with my sister the other day, and we were talking about beading and trying to get into beading again during the pandemic. And she said, the best teacher is to give Erin a call. So I'm not putting your phone number in the comment section. I think that asking friends and relatives that have some knowledge is always really helpful. And it's interesting how we can reconnect over the phone, right? In ways that we weren't able to before.
Mm-hmm. I think there are some more common books out there. This is not a new art form. It's not limited to the Dakota or Indigenous peoples. So I think if you did a quick search on hand-turned ribbon work or hand-stitched ribbon work, there might be some good beginner resources out there.
Last question. Steph McCabe asks, do you know of pieces in private collections that ideally should be shared in a museum? That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Not offhand. The Framboise blanket was a good example that had that piece had been in the family for about 3 generations and had at one point been used as a tablecloth or table covering. And then after it appeared on Antiques Roadshow and the historical relevance of the piece was realized, then it went to live at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. But you know, it's hard to know what's out there. Maybe people will be inspired by seeing some of the things in the Our Home exhibit and say, we have something like that, and bring it out.
Yes, I agree. I think that sharing what we have out there in the world is, and we're always uncovering new things, right? And old things that are new again. And I think it's really interesting to think about that. We're running out of time here. I just want to quickly mention where you both are situated within this interview. It looks like you're deep in your workspaces. I see some beautiful ribbons behind you, Tumi, and Erin, I know you always have these amazing workspaces from which you create beautiful things, and I just wish you both the best. And is there anything else that you want to say before we sign off?
I can't think of anything. Go create.
Go make stuff.
Draw on a piece of paper, write some meaningful words, pick up some fabric. You don't have to be an expert to start.
Maya. Well, thank you both for sharing with us today. And thanks to all of you for joining us. We'd love to hear from you. If you have a few minutes, there is a link in the comments to a short survey. A recording of this program will be available shortly on Facebook and YouTube. Please join us again next month on January 28th, when my dear friend and colleague, Rita Wallazek-Arndt, collections specialist in our Native Americans Initiatives Department, will speak with Jenny Kappenman about her work, which includes jingle dresses, applique, and beadwork. So, Pida Maya, Thank you all for being here and enjoy the rest of your day. Dokshta ke,
Doshta ke.
Está.